All right, today we're going to learn the worst 5 things about the Baker's Museum. So one of the downsides, I think, the museum was they had a Holocaust exhibition, which is fine. Their Holocaust should be obviously explored. It's a little interesting. It's just kind of this guy who is a son of Holocaust victims, but not a victim himself. He grew up in Buenos Aires, and he kind of depicted all these gruesome figures of the Nazis and the Holocaust. It was very present during the 1960s because it had been kind of covered up in the 40s when it initially came out, and then kind of more and more had been discovered about how horrible the Holocaust had been. So it's a very important part of the of history to study, but artistically it's kind of, I don't know, grotesque, I would say. But it is what it is. I guess you could see a positive or negative. So one of the downsides, I'd say, is they have a painting by this guy that does the rabbit ears. He's very hot right now in the Miami market. I don't really care for it because it's just literally a finger painting with your fingers of rabbit ears. And somehow it became like the top thing in Miami and all around the art world for some reason. I don't really care for it. I've seen it in person and, besides outside of the museum. So, hats off to him for selling it, but artistic value I just see is, 1 to 0 for me. One downside, I think, is I didn't really see a cafe, so you are kind of isolated here. So I don't know if there's a cafe close by. So it's always nice to kind of take a break while you're, peruse some of the museum, then take a break, have a cafe, think about it, go back and see some of the artwork. They didn't really have that here, so you don't really have that. It isn't a large museum, so maybe you don't per se need a cafe, but it is nice to have a cafe attached to a museum. I'd say one of the downsides to the museum, if you're looking for more of a comprehensive art history from the early 1900s, when kind of modern contemporary art starts, up until contemporary, which would be now, there's really not kind of a cohesive collection, I would say, as far as covering early Picasso. There's no Picasso, there's no Dali, there's no Pollock, Jackson Pollock. There's a scattering here and there of different artists, which is great. But if you're looking for kind of a whole historical aspect of the museum, it's really, it's just here and there, kind of, not really a cohesive collection, I would say. Another thing I think is maybe a downside to the museum is there's not too much sculpture at the museum on the outdoors. A lot of times a museum will have a nice outdoor sculpture area. There are a few sculptures here and there, but I didn't see an overwhelming amount. So I think they could maybe improve that, but there were a couple that, like this one, which is kind of cool, I like. But overall, I think they could have added a few more. And that concludes the worst 5 things about the Baker's Museum.